Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. And cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hi there, and welcome back to Eggs. This week, we have special guest, Nicholas Prouten. Nick is an expert in blockchain and cryptocurrency technologies and an ambassador for the Lode One project, a cryptocurrency exchange which, unlike many others, is backed by physical assets like gold and silver. Through their coins, Lode, AUX, and AGX, investors are able to buy, sell, and trade digital equivalents of real bullion as easily as spending traditional fiat currency. Nick has a diverse background, having been fortunate enough to have worked in a broad range of industries, including cybersecurity, gaming, real estate, and entertainment, all which set him up well for the work he does now with blockchain technology. As a result of his diverse experience, he has developed a powerful set of skills to fit almost any situation and project. Here to break down the complex and often misunderstood topic of blockchain technology, what Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies actually are, and his assertion that the future of crypto will be stable, asset-backed, and collateralized by assets like gold and silver, please join us in welcoming to the show, Nicholas Prouten. Hey, Nick, how are you, man?
I'm great, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me. That was a fantastic introduction. Quick little correction, though, or point of clarification before we dive in, just so regulators don't come hunting after me. We're not a cryptocurrency exchange. Per se. We do provide a mobile wallet solution, which is great, and we do create tokenized assets in digital gold and silver, as the introduction made, but we're not a cryptocurrency exchange like Binance or Coinbase, if you will.
Great. No, thank you for that clarification. Well, Nick, let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you are, where you come from, and how you wound up in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of it as a series of fortunate events, really, that led me to blockchain. More than anything, as the introduction implied, I've been in the space and technology for about almost 10 years or so. I can scarcely believe how fast time flies. Largely in the earlier days, I was working again in the gaming industry, which was my nice segue because I'm a huge nerd at heart into the tech space. But very quickly got involved in cybersecurity, a company that helped prevent pedophiles from getting to kids in MMO games. So obviously really important work being done there. And what kind of ended up happening was, you hit a certain ceiling within organizations, and as an entrepreneur and as an individual, you go, okay, well, how do I need to reach the next rung, right? So I started migrating to consulting work and to helping entrepreneurs build their projects and their companies, and working within digital advertising for real estate and so on and so forth. And I was consulting one company with respects to e-commerce, and the guy goes to me, and this is like circa 2016-ish. He goes, "I would like to start accepting cryptocurrency." And I look at him and I go, "What on God's green earth is a cryptocurrency?" Which I think is where most of us started.
It was at 2016.
Yeah. And that was really my introduction into the blockchain space. And I started diving into it and looking at how the money that exists today that we use in most developed nations, and how fundamentally flawed it is. And the technology of Bitcoin and blockchain, which we're going to dive into a little bit more today. And it became really evident that the financial industry at large, other industries as well, but the financial industry at large was operating on legacy technology, old, outdated methodologies that were ripe to be replaced by something new. And when you started looking at major financial institutions and who was actually looking into this technology and beginning to investigate this technology, again, 2016, not many hedge funds had yet moved over. Elon Musk didn't really care about it, didn't really know about it. But it became evident to me by just looking at who was getting involved in the momentum in which these exchanges and these platforms were growing, that this was going to be something huge. And usually I feel like we get to catch the tailwinds of these big major sort of events, especially within technology. You hear about a new app or something from your friend after it's already kind of blown up, et cetera, et cetera. But here was an opportunity to become a leader in an industry where there wasn't even really any regulation around these assets yet. So you had the opportunity to set yourself up as for lack of a better word, a player in the space. And by the time 2017 rolled around, there were still only about 7,000 blockchain developers in the world, to give you some perspective of just how niche this skill set was and the people who understood that skill set. So I started investigating and looking into projects that were doing, work with blockchain. And there were a couple that I participated in that unfortunately didn't make it. The longevity of them wasn't there, but that's okay. Anybody who's been through the entrepreneurial gauntlet knows, you fail fast and most regularly fail often until you strike gold, right? And you just keep on plowing ahead. And that's when I really came around to the Lode project. And Lode stood out to me because there are so many cryptocurrency projects in the space and blockchain projects in the space that kind of lack a use case. Even blockchains that have great logic and technical logic to them, and academic methodologies to how they are developed, but making something go fast doesn't mean that you have a good use case for her as why something would be used at all. But Lode, which largely tokenizes physical assets, gold and silver, and puts them onto the blockchain and creates digital gold and silver for people to trade and use and speculate and spend and send. Here were two of the world's biggest commodities, and there was a real justification for using these as monetary vehicles, as cash, for lack of a better phrase, because throughout most of our history on this earth, we've actually used precious metals. It's a standard that is really well understood, still accepted in the world today, and largely has protected people from the risks of inflations that we experience with fiat or unbacked dollars. So I was like, okay, here is something with some stopping power. Here's something that could probably survive a huge correction in the market. And lo and behold, 4 years later, 2021, Lode is still around, and it's doing really, really great work. And that kind of brings us up to speed as to where we are today. So a little bit long-winded, but back over to you, Ryan. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, I think that's really useful. And I think it's also good to kind of show this progression of the technology over the last few years too, just because people, I think largely still don't really understand what we're talking about when we talk about this stuff. So maybe that makes sense then to go backwards a little bit. And let's talk a little bit about just what blockchain even is. So I think that, there are lots of techie, buzzy words that get thrown around a lot. And I'm not sure that everybody actually knows what the hell they're talking about. And I think that this might be one of those examples. So do you mind kind of just breaking down what blockchain technology is in the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll bring it down to the most basic level that I can and try and use some metaphors to help describe it, right? Let's say you're going to the grocery store and you're going to pay for some groceries, right? That transaction that takes place when you tap a card onto a payment terminal is basically a transfer of value that is being conducted by two banks, and most oftentimes the Visa or MasterCard payment rails that you're working on, right? So these banks are intermediaries, and alongside with the Visa rails that are acting as trusted parties to verify that this transfer of value is taking place. And of course, they're going to be taking cuts the whole way through, right? And this is how Visa does it. The Visa charges the bank, and the receiving bank, the merchant bank, charges the merchant, right? What blockchain basically does is, rather than needing trusted institutions, it uses technology. It uses algorithms known as consensus algorithms to act as a virtual handshake and basically transfer that value without the need for those middlemen. And that information is, once that transaction is conducted, is stored in blocks, right? And those blocks are like a Lego structure that only goes up, and you can't take it apart, right? So it just stacks one after the other, and this information becomes immutable because these consensus algorithms, or these computers that run this blockchain, they are there are tens of thousands of them in the most cases of like a public blockchain, right? It's not one monolithic program running on a supercomputer in IBM. It's individuals like you and me connecting their processors up to the Bitcoin network, right? And operating the blockchain off of that. And that's where that concept of decentralization comes in. And so in order for these transactions to be processed, this network has to agree with each other. It has to reach consensus. And this makes it very secure, right? Compared to traditional technologies. And this makes it, again, it gives it that immutability, which is often touted in the space as well. And that ultimately brings around a greater level of accountability when you take into consideration that most blockchains are what we like to call pseudo-anonymous, right? You've probably heard that as well. You've probably either heard mixed stories that Bitcoin is either completely untrackable or that it's totally trackable. So I'll dispel that one right now as well. All Bitcoin wallets are publicly available. However, it doesn't say your name. It doesn't say John Smith's bank account, right? And here's how much John did, and here's how much John spent. It's basically a cryptographic hash, for lack of a better phrase. It's a wallet identification that is anonymous unless you have told people or published people that that wallet address, and so people would be able to deduce who or what held that wallet. But that being said, all these transactions, all the wallet addresses are publicly available. You just might not know who that wallet belongs to. So if you do, let's say a central government has a Bitcoin wallet address and that wallet is publicly available, and a government were to say, no, we did not sell arms to that country, any individual could go look up and say, well, actually, we saw the funds and we know that this wallet is yours, and we know that wallet is, this foreign country. And so ergo, you did actually make this transaction happen. So this is a very hypothetical situation to paint the picture of how blockchain can provide accountability, where previously, cash and traditional financing, there's a lot of barriers or blockers, and it's a lot more sort of behind the curtain and how we presently govern our finances. So hopefully that's clear as mud. Back over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think, for a lot of people, I think this idea of decentralization is scary, right? It's this, we're so used to going to our banks or traditional lenders and things like that to get money, or to, transfer money via Visa. So it's interesting or cool that you put it in such a way that it's kind of, almost the same thing. It's just a different way of doing it through different people. And
yeah, if I can, it's basically taking responsibility for your finances. So in North America, in Canada especially, we have traditionally had faith in our institutions to look after it on our behalf. But your cash is actually, for those of you who don't know, they don't hold your cash. The safe is virtually empty because they are constantly loaning that cash out and doing what's called fractional reserve banking. So basically the digits in your bank account are an IOU. So if you're uncomfortable with that and that concept, then the idea of something like a blockchain, where you don't need to have a bank hold on to your cash for it to be safe and secure, and nobody else can lend it out, use it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like getting rid of that concept of the IOU, there's a lot of reasons why blockchain and blockchain technology would be really compelling.
Yeah, well, and I wonder too, if you couldn't go a little deeper into just why do we even need this at all, right? So, I mean, of course, we have our traditional banks and things seems to work okay. I mean, they sort of account for the fraud and abuse and stuff that's going to happen and security breaches here and there. Like, I mean, it's just part of using technology, right? So what is the root of why we felt like we needed a technology like this in the first place?
Yeah, I think the accountability component does play a role into it. I mean, I wish I could get inside the mind of the infamous individual or group known as Satoshi Nakamoto, founder of Bitcoin. Largely, it is speculated it came out as a response to the 2008 financial crisis, right? And so that accountability component that we were just talking about does play a role, but it's also came out of a desire with specifically Bitcoin for a better kind of money, right? The kind of money that we have is depreciative and a small body of people, and what is essentially an oligopoly, the central banking network, and the Federal Reserve in the case of the United States. But a very small body of people controls the supply of currency, right? And generally what happens throughout history is that when power consolidates to a small group of people, it doesn't pan out so well for the rest of us. So as more supply gets printed into circulation, the value of your dollar continues to go down. And so what used to cost you $1 when you were a kid now costs you $2, or you suffer shrinkflation where it still costs $1, but they're giving you less for it. And we don't notice this normally because it's like a frog boiling in water, to use another metaphor, right? It happens so slowly over time that we don't realize. But the US dollar has lost 90% of its purchasing power over the past 100 years. That's a huge depreciation in value. And so I think in combination with the desire for a more accountable, more autonomous system that had a fixed supply and wasn't in the control of any central body or government, that there was that component of that, and then a desire for the money itself to be better, which kind of led to the birth of Bitcoin. And through that, people have discovered new use cases for this technology that I think are really fantastic, practical applications for things like medical records or identities, right? Smart contracts through projects like Ethereum allow us to have greater functions than just send and receive. But to answer your question, I think that was kind of initially what led to the birth of Bitcoin and the market as we now know it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And let's then, I guess, sort of transfer, you were talking about the different use cases and things like that for blockchain. Let's maybe talk a little bit about sort of cryptocurrency specifically as one method here. I mean, obviously there are a lot of things being built on blockchain technology now. I participate, for example, I sell NFTs. So I'm doing some things on the blockchain via NFT, which, we can save for another show. But cryptocurrency itself, I think, is widely misunderstood. I think, some of the early beginnings, I think, feel a little Silk Roadish. Let's build this currency that we can, pass money back and forth anonymously so we can buy things we shouldn't be buying online. And I think that I think it's starting to dissolve a little bit, but I think there's still that reputation that, this isn't totally trustworthy, or it's too volatile to be involved with, or whatever. So, I mean, can you maybe talk a little bit about just cryptocurrency in general, why it's a suitable alternative for cash? Like, why would we rather go this way than the dollar? And, one example you cited, of course, being inflation and the likelihood that there's some serious inflation on the way here, especially in the States post-COVID. So, anyway, I wonder if you'd just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the important thing to realize here is that cryptocurrency is kind of a catch-all for financial instruments on the blockchain at this moment in time, right? So as they presently stand, a lot of these quote-unquote currencies are just speculative vehicles, right? They're coins that sit there on a cryptocurrency exchange that don't really have a practical application, and everybody's hoping that they go to the moon so they can be the next Bitcoin. They effectively operate like a stock. But without any shareholders or without any sort of equity in an actual company. So you gotta really, I think, take the time to understand what it is you're investing in the cryptocurrency space before you throw your money at it. But that's just me. I know a lot of people there are just there for the pure wealth appreciation, and that there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting topic too around the idea of just the different types of coins, right? I like how you phrase that it's basically just a catch-all term for all these different things, right? Because I think, just like, I don't know, if you were investing in fiat currencies, you have your dollar, you have a euro, you have a rupee, you have a whatever, right? And each one sort of serves its purpose and maybe has some unique characteristics or something. And cryptocurrencies, or these different coins, are sort of that way too, where
they are similar.
Bitcoin has a purpose, where Algorand maybe is something totally different, right? So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you have coins like the ones that we produce over here at Lode, which are designed to be stable, right? Meaning that you're not likely to expect the huge appreciative gains that you would see with something like Bitcoin. They're designed to be used as monetary vehicles, as cash, effectively. So, go to your local Starbucks and pay for a coffee with that. That's largely what a stablecoin functions as. And oftentimes stablecoins are backed either by a commodity, a fiat currency, or something to that effect. You have sort of what I like to call platform blockchains. So these are your EOSs, these are your Ethereums, these are your Trons, and your I guess maybe even the Cardanos of the world, that basically act like an operating system, for lack of a better phrase. So people can build upon these blockchains and issue their projects or their tokens on top of these through things like ERC20 tokens and so on, right? And they make it accessible and easy to use the blockchain or get into the blockchain or leverage the blockchain for whatever project you're doing. And this is why most companies and majority of projects that don't really aren't really looking to create a quote unquote currency, but more of a speculative asset, will tend to go on an Ethereum blockchain, is because it's the easiest and most well adopted blockchain for projects at this point in time, I'd argue. Then you have currencies like Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is kind of in a class of its own, in my humble opinion, because of the fact that there is a lot of payment infrastructure being built to accept Bitcoin and utilize Bitcoin as a currency, but largely what it's become is a great store of value, or arguably a really competitive store of value when you compare it against something like gold, because of those huge appreciative gains that it has. So while Bitcoin has been touted as a currency, so to speak, it's actually not very efficient as one. It's not very scalable. It's slow. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for a merchant to run their business off of something like Bitcoin, because the price can swing so wildly in such a short period of time. So, how is an individual supposed to price their wares when they could double or shrink in value? Their margins could collapse or explode, within a fraction of a second. And additionally, people are less likely to spend assets that are going to go to the moon at any given time. Like, why would I give up my Bitcoin when I know it could go to 100,000, overnight or in the next 5-10 minutes? So even though Bitcoin was touted as a currency, it's more of something that people want to buy and hold because they see the promise of it expanding. So this is just some of the surface layers. You've also touched on NFTs as well, which are kind of the new thing on the market that everybody's pumped about, which are effectively the metaphor I like to use is like collector's items on the blockchain almost. Or certification of ownership of a particular item, which I also think has a really practical application beyond just speculating and holding on to things because you hope they appreciate in value. This is kind of like a baseline.
Yeah, there are a couple things about that sort of NFT space that I think are particularly interesting, and these might be sort of the future use cases beyond just currency. But I like this idea, or I've seen this idea of sort of fractionalization or fractional ownership of things, right? So, the blockchain and the ability to move things around sort of in this digital space seems to make it very easy for people to, I don't know, buy in on a piece of artwork, for example, or, we've been talking about using it so I run a marketing agency, and in our company, we've been talking about using it for like logo packages and stuff. So we've created a logo or a brand for you. We'll sell it to you as an NFT so that you can, register ownership on the blockchain. And then, your unlockable object or something that lives inside the NFT is your brand campaign or whatever. And, so I really like that for security. And the reason I think so much about it lately is way back 1 million years ago when Photoshop must have been 2 or 3 came out. I was working for a semiconductor plant overnight, and I had the opportunity to just kind of fiddle around at night, right? That's sort of how I got my beginning playing in Photoshop, was playing on this thing overnight. And back then we were really into motorcycles. So like we all had the little super bikes and that kind of thing, right? And so I had created this graphic that was a zebra riding a CBR 900 or something and speeding away from a lion, right? And I never thought anything of it. I posted it to this motorcycle forum and then I just kind of walked away from it, never saw it again. Some years later, I get an email, maybe 10 years later, I get an email from somebody asking for permission to use it. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, God, I don't even know where you found that thing, right? Because I barely remembered it. Well, at this point, and I think it's starting to finally taper off, but if you search Zebra on motorcycle, my art will come up and you'll see it multiplied by a gazillion times. This thing went on to live its own life and it's been sold on coffee cups and t-shirts and all kinds of crap all over for, 15 years now. And it's so funny because had we had something like blockchain technology back then, I could have registered ownership of it prior to publishing and been able to sort of get back to the root ownership of that. And, not to be litigious or anything, but I could have shown ownership if I wanted to pursue some of these people and say, hey, man, you've sold X number of coffee cups with my artwork on it. I would like to see a piece of that, or whatever. So I love the way that I could own things.
Absolutely. No, I really love this application for people who do work in the creative industry because theft of content is something that occurs really commonly to people that work, especially in the digital art space. Not many people going and robbing the Louvre, but
well, and I think if I'm right, you've got a little bit of a background in marketing yourself. And I mean, if you've done anything like the way we've always done it, sort of in agency, I mean, we will put together a presentation or a pitch or something for a client and maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't, but maybe they don't buy it. But then miraculously, not too long down the road, you see something very similar to what you published go live, right? And so, and this happens all the time, and I don't even know that it's always, ill-intentioned. Sometimes I think you just kind of, you heard that song in the back of your head a while ago, and then just now it comes forward, and so it feels like novelty, but it's actually this old memory. So I don't know that every client is a bad client, but I just have seen this happen a lot. And I'm just like, God, if you could leverage the blockchain for this, where you could actually, before you sent over this asset for them to look at, register it, say, as of today, this is our piece of art. You're looking at it. We'll give you permission to look at it, for X fee, to Ethereum or whatever it is. And, so they can pull down this asset, look at it or whatever. And then, you could always sort of show ownership or proof of concept, if somebody was to run out your campaign.
Exactly. And I mean, even outside just a marketing campaign or something to that effect that you've just described, like you've got people that will go into pitches with companies like Google. They'll pitch an idea or a product, a service they've created. And these companies will be like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And then they will literally steal this person's idea. And this person is going up against Google. So things like NFTs are a huge practical application for the protection of content and services, as you've just described. And this is the stuff that really gets me pumped in the space, is these practical applications of the technology that we're talking about. So,
well, and so maybe that's a good transition then to talk a little bit more about Lode and how this works, right? So just like an NFT is, I guess, asset backed by bits and bytes, maybe it's this graphic you've sold or whatever, right? But you're selling something for all intents and purposes, you're selling something physical, even though it's just a digital asset usually. You guys are doing something similar where you're taking sort of this real life asset being gold or silver bullion, and then you're matching it up with sort of a digital token. So do you mind talking about how all that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, It's interesting, right? Because as I mentioned early on in our call, gold and silver are two commodities that are huge markets already, right? So, and it's something that it has both a speculative background and a practical background, or a commercial or industrial background, especially with silver being used in over 10,000 different use cases, and it's one of the biggest commodities on earth. And then in addition to that, you have all this monetary background where it's been functionally used as cash historically. So there was a real felt need, I believe, in the market for companies who can digitize these assets and put them on a blockchain. And even if you don't believe in sort of the aspirational sort of return to the gold standard narrative that really was at the heart of Lode, there is a great argument to say that these assets should be on a blockchain and should be tradable, so that people can hedge that trading that they're conducting against something that has more stability and has retained its purchasing power over a longer period of time. When they are trading their cryptocurrencies, right? And that, especially with silver, oddly enough, there are lots of competitors for gold-backed assets out there in the cryptocurrency space, but not much in the way of silver. in terms of easily accessible and highly liquid assets out there, which is really peculiar to me. So there is a felt need there as well. As to how we do it, we've taken a really distributed approach. We have our first asset, which is our Lode token, that you can really only purchase with physical gold or silver. So you can either contact a bullion dealer who will, purchase the metal on your behalf and send it into one of our 8 vaults around the world, or you can actually ship your idle silver, your silver or gold that's sitting there collecting dust and not doing much for you, and you can purchase this bond, which is what it's legally classified as, the Lode token, that pays a dividend in gold and silver every 52 days, which is pretty cool. And what we do with this silver and gold once it lands in the vaults is we actually use that as the foundation to tokenize them into the digital currencies that we see out there, that we put out there, our AGX and our AUX. And each one of those tokens, for perspective, every AGX is backed by 1 gram of vaulted, audited, and insured silver. And similarly, every AUX is backed by 1 milligram of vaulted, audited, and insured gold. And we are largely blockchain agnostic. So we're big believers in interoperability. So everything comes into the system on our permissioned ledger, known as a hyperledger first. And I'm assuming some people are a little more advanced in here, so I apologize if I'm losing some of you. But we start off on this permissioned ledger for inventory management, just crossing all our T's, dotting all our I's. The auditors have to come through, make certain, and if there are any changes that need to be made, we need to be able to do that before we put it out to consumers. When we are ready to issue assets out to consumers, then we move it onto a public blockchain. And right now, our go-to is the Syscoin blockchain, which can do 160,000 transactions per second. It's a fork of the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's really good for the speed of trade and commerce, right? That being able to instantly tap, spend, and send and move on your way without waiting, 5, 10, 20, 30, a couple hours for your transaction to process. And largely what we've been doing over the past 4 years is getting this methodology just right, and putting these tokens into circulation kind of on a retail model. But now, after working really hard with regulators in both Europe and the United States, and we're making waves into developing nations within Africa and within the Asian subcontinent, we're able to get loud about this now and start publishing these assets on exchanges. And we've also built our mobile wallet technology, which allows people easy access to these stabilized assets to purchase this digital gold and silver and very quickly hear your favorite fanfare, whether that's USDC, Ethereum, Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. But one thing that people have really underestimated in this market is doing something in a compliant fashion. I know there's probably some libertarians out there and kind of the shoot from the hip cowboy diplomacy types that would just put a project out there and list on Binance or on a small exchange or on a DEX, decentralized exchange, and away you go. But as we've seen, what can happen when you start getting big enough is then you have players like the SEC come after you, and then you get tied up in these massive lawsuits, right? Which can take years in some circumstances. So how do you bring project like this to the world in a big way? And for perspective, we're active in 135 countries, I think now. It's a slow, arduous process, and you have to work hand in hand with these regulators. And it just so happens we chose 2 of the most difficult and confusing and fluctuating industries out there. We chose precious metals, and we chose blockchain, and we said, let's do both. And really what I think that we've accomplished so far is creating a great hybrid that takes the best of both these assets, right? You get the protection and the security and the confidence that comes with holding a gold asset that protects you from that inflation that you're going to see with your US dollar, your Canadian dollar. And for anybody who doubts this, I would argue go talk to a financial advisor. Most of them will argue that at least some percentage of your portfolio should be held in gold and silver because they are quote unquote safe haven assets. So you get all the confidence of the physical metal, but you get all the benefits of a currency and of a functional digital asset. You don't need to store it in your house, and you're actually saving and gaining more money because of this model. Allows you to cut down on the premiums that you experience in a retail market. So right now, when you go to a bullion dealer, you're going to pay, if you're buying like a 1 ounce coin, as high as 50% premium on that coin. right? And then when you go to sell it, that bullion dealer is going to give you a couple of percentage points under spot. And this means that you're hemorrhaging cash on both sides. Even when you win, you lose. Through this model, we're able to put this out into the world, into an exchange, and people can get much closer to that spot price and liquidate for much better rates than they're presently receiving. So there's a lot of inefficiencies that we're solving within the precious metal space, within the currency space, and we're bringing two worlds and merging them together.
Yeah. Is there such a thing as being able to convert their Ox coin or AUX coin or AGX coin? Can they convert that back into a physical gold product if they wanted to get that? Like the same way that you suggested that they could go to a dealer or a bullion dealer and I guess basically pay them to buy into the system on their behalf. Can they then do the opposite of that and pull out hard asset if they wanted to have something physical once again?
Yeah. So point of clarity. I mean, if you're interested in claiming a stake in the company, you can buy the Lode token, and you have to buy that through precious metals. You can still use your credit card. It's very easy. But that equity asset, that virtual equity asset that you bought is just that. It's an equity asset. It's unbacked. You're saying, I'm putting my faith in this company. I want this company to do well. So give me some equity. The digital gold and digital silver, which you can buy through our mobile wallet and more very quickly on the Hotbit exchange and more to come. Yes, 100%. Those assets are all backed, and you can redeem those for the physical asset, and we'll ship it to you from the vault that is nearest to you. And there is a methodology for gold and silver bugs out there that if you can't hold it, you don't own it. And so while obviously we need to have silver and gold in our system in order for these currencies to be backed into function properly, we do want to give people the confidence that they can, yes, reclaim these assets. And if they want to exit the system or get the physical asset, they can do so by coming to us and redeeming it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I love that. I think, given and of course, this is super general kind of stereotyping, but I mean, generally speaking, the people who are the biggest advocates for gold and silver might be a tad older, and to get into this technological route of investing might be a little scary for them. So I think that ability to sort of get a hold of your asset again is great. Even in other crypto spaces, like, I mean, if you buy Bitcoin, you can then sell Bitcoin and get it back, not unlike investing in a stock or something. So it doesn't need to be all that scary. And something that's non-volatile or relatively not volatile, like something like silver or gold, obviously a little bit safer, a little less speculative than something like a Bitcoin that's literally based on nothing physical and, could fluctuate. I mean, in the last couple of days, even it's gone up, $3,000 or $4,000, but could easily drop all that this afternoon. So exactly. It's I guess it's a trade-off, right? And you can decide how much risk you're willing to take. And but I do think that that's a great aspect of it. I did want to.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that's a really great point there as well. Is it's a great soft step into the space if you are uncertain or wanting to be a little more risk averse with your portfolio management, right? We're never saying to everybody that all your assets only invest in AGX, AUX, right? Like we're just saying that when you want to take some wins and feel safe, or if you're uncertain and you're just starting, this is a great way to do it. And it's probably a good idea that you hold just a little bit in case that market does collapse, because all markets are cyclical, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So, but as we're talking about these people who maybe are new to this technology, or maybe a little reticent or a little scared of it, or just flat out don't understand it and don't know where to get in, whether it's crypto or whatever. I mean, of course, you can speak from the perspective of your wallet, but how complex is this process for people to get into? If I wanted to introduce my mother to investing in digital technologies or digital currencies, how complex is it to get somebody into the process?
Well, I'll say one thing's for sure. We've gotten a lot better. Even going back to the 2017 boom, there was a little bit of a learning curve that felt like running into a brick wall. So it was more of a 90-degree angle, which was a lot for people to get through. But part of what we do within the product departments of these projects is trying to make that experience of onboarding into cryptocurrencies and into digital assets a lot smoother, a lot simpler. So now what you'll see when you go to most regulated most regulated exchanges or most mobile apps is it'll start off with a very simple email sign up, just like you would with any other app or software or website that you go onto with your phone, right? Create a little account, name, email, you're off to the races. Generally from there, depending on the region of the world that you're in and the level of scrutiny that that project is under, you'll be asked to undergo something called KYC. And we're no exception. And KYC stands for Know Your Clients. It's there to protect you. It's there to protect the projects and prevent things like fraud, right? And money laundering and so on. So usually in this circumstance, you're asked to provide a piece of your identity, which in most circumstances, a driver's license is sufficient, or a passport even, and then a proof of your address and what's called the liveness test. And this is usually just a selfie where you're either moving around or speaking, or sometimes they ask you to hold up a picture with today's date on it, right? And this is to illustrate that that you are in fact a real person, that that you're not submitting forged documents or something like that, and that your identity on your card, on your identification card, matches the real human being. And then from there, usually you can go off to the races, and most platforms will allow you to buy into the market with your debit or credit card these days. So that KYC process can feel a little intimidating at first, but you got to remember you go through pretty similar processes when you register either at your local bank or on a traditional stock and brokerage app, broker dealer app like a Wealthsimple or something like that. They're going to ask for you for that personal information there. So if you can get over that hump, it really only takes like 2 or 3 minutes, and you can get off to the races, within 15.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful, right? Because I think a lot of people do get intimidated by that. And it made me laugh when you were talking about the learning curve, just a few years ago. And it's really unfortunate for me, actually, because, I'm a pretty technological guy, but I tried getting a Kraken account going, I don't know, way back then, about the time period you're talking about, 15, 16, something like that. And it was wildly complex, right? I mean, all this stuff, plus I was doing it from the States. And so there was some other stuff that had to be done. It was this whole mess. And I could only really touch it when I was over in Europe and come back. I mean, it was a nightmare. But anyway, I finally got it set up, but I was so frustrated with it and I couldn't figure out how to get money into it that I just walked away from it. And had I bought, Bitcoin or any of these coins really back then, maybe I'd be one of these guys that, not podcasting for a living. I'd be sitting around doing something else, sipping little drinks with umbrellas in them. But, but instead I didn't end up getting into it for a few years later until there were platforms like Coinbase and Binance and some of these others where you can quickly and easily, give them your identification, go through this process like you've described, and then you're off to the races, like you said. So I think they've definitely made great strides in making it easier and more accessible for people. But I do think, this is a technology that's still intimidating for a lot of people. And I think there's for sure a curve there.
I couldn't agree more. And oftentimes you'll see, people who are big cryptocurrency enthusiasts talking about adoption. And while I would argue we're probably at the beginning of the early majority at the point where we're at, we've yet to make the technology simple enough for grandma to use. Don't get me wrong, to any grandmas listening on the show, I'm sure you're competent and can figure it out. But on average, people should be going to, if we really want to see practical adoption and really see digital assets become the norm in terms of payments, we need to get to a point where people are going to the grocery store and spending and not even thinking about how this technology works. Right now, when I still send a transaction, it's still a little arduous, and I find myself thinking about how this technology works, but I don't think about how the Visa rails work when I go to pay with my credit card. I don't think about that transfer or anything. And so until we get to that point, I don't think we're going to see true practical adoption. It's going to exist largely for those people who want to be speculators in the market, but that will shift, right? Surprise, surprise, all the banks that were screaming that Bitcoin was a scam 4 or 5 years ago are now turning around and having blockchain departments of 50, 7,500 people, and dumping a huge amount of resources into adopting this technology. As anybody who was invested in the market knew eventually they would do, or they would collapse. So if you look at where things are going, I think in the near future, I would say within 5 to 10 years, almost all transactions will be conducted on a blockchain of some fashion. I do think most world governments are moving towards releasing their own stable coins, which is kind of like putting a lipstick on the pig. You didn't really solve the problem. You just used a new shade of blush to make it look better. These stable coin assets and these government-backed currencies will sort of replace the digital cash that we're using now, and stocks, bonds, ETFs, all those kind of traditional financial assets will also move over to the blockchain. And that won't mean that they won't operate like stocks or bonds anymore, because those are more, I guess, conceptual or legal definitions of what an object is versus how the technology is directly impacting it. But I think the vast majority of the financial sector is going to move over to usage of this technology.
Well, and it's funny, just I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking, and, you think about times, not even that long ago when, you were still writing paper checks, and then you had an ATM card, but you couldn't really use it anywhere, right? It was just so you could go get your cash out. And then that became a debit card, and then you got your credit cards, and then you got everything else. And like all these things have sort of evolved and moved, but really the process isn't all that different from the transition we're making now, right? I mean, we went from a spot where you traded green dollar bills, or, in your case, maybe different color dollar bills, back and forth with people. And, that was the way commerce was done. And then at some point we started, writing these IOUs, we started cutting checks, this symbol that represented the money in our bank account. Then, as we continue to move, I mean, I think about it even more and more, especially for younger generations. Like I have a 14-year-old, and I mean, they have no relationship whatsoever with cash. I mean, grandma gives them $10 for Easter, but she throws it in her, it transfers it into his bank account, so he just has it on his debit card. Yeah. And so, I mean, they don't have the same kind of relationship with cash that people who are a little bit older like me sort of bridge that, that transition. And so,
and I think to that point, I think, what we've experienced recently with the pandemic kind of accelerated that process. And usually conflicts do cause, and these can be wars, these could be crises like pandemics, usually result in an explosion of innovation, oddly enough, or an accelerated pace of technological development, ergo the arms race, ergo what we're experiencing now. So I think, as a silver lining for the industry at large, again, this pandemic has been awful. But I think one of the good outcomes of it has been that we've all been developing a greater appreciation and usage of this digital cash, which is expediting our transition into this new technology.
Well, and I think you may be able to explain some of the rapid growth and things like Bitcoin to just exactly what you're describing. I mean, people got very used to spending money at home online and moving around assets in a digital way while they were, home on quarantine. And, all this innovation was happening on the blockchain, and people were, rolling out new tokens or rolling out new technologies and things like that. But the fear that might have kept you out of it before and the accessibility is both, the fear has gone down and accessibility has gone up. And, as a result, you're seeing way more people buying in, and then you get these, we were joking off air a little bit before, but how, Elon Musk can whisper this into existence, and all of a sudden everybody's in, like everyone, all hail Elon, so it's kind of funny how that happens. But I mean, but that is a nod of consumer confidence, because it wasn't long after that Tesla then invested in Bitcoin. And then shortly thereafter, many financial institutions, and, maybe they were doing it before, but the big profile ones started happening after that. And it's, I think that's all going to lead to additional adoption.
It is, right? Because there's a huge portion of market psychology, and nobody wants to be first in the pot with these. And this is why the adoption curve is what it is, where you have a very tiny amount of people being those innovators, those early adopters, early majority. Most of us have seen that sort of graph or in that curve that sort of takes place with products. And it's no different with financial instruments, right? So now we're seeing this big money move in, and these regulated institutions saying, yes, we are going to start doing this. Visa says, hey, we're going to settle to USDC. This gives consumer psychology a huge boost of confidence, as you were just describing, right?
Yeah, well, and like you were talking about this sort of aspect of the transaction that needs to happen, where people just are doing it without thinking about it. They're just swiping that card or tapping their phone or whatever, and the assets are transferred. When your bank starts settling into USDC or whatever, then I mean, it kind of will make no difference, right? I mean, I have X number of assets. I need to pay for this thing that costs X number of assets. I tap my phone, I transfer it, I'm done. How that gets done, I don't really care, but it gets done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because we were talking about fear about getting into the market, and I think that wasn't just for the consumer. I also think it was for these institutions, because when Bitcoin really started blowing up, the whole narrative was around how it was like this pseudo anti-establishment, is going to disrupt your oligopoly system, and banks are like, low key terrified of this.
Yeah, they're part of that system.
And they don't understand how to implement it into their business, right? 4 or 5 years later, now they understand how the technology works and how to apply it and how they can participate in the market with it without it being a threat to them. And so because of that, it's less intimidating and they can have an easier time implementing this in technology and adopting it, right?
Yeah, well, and it's funny too, even as you think about sort of traditional banking evolving, like I personally have been looking into some, savings options, right? Opening a savings account, that kind of thing, right? And I have one with my current bank, but there's a big fee every month and there's all this stuff for having this account and it's kind of a pain. And I only get so many transfers per month before they start hitting me with fees and all this other stuff. When you could now, and say nothing of the interest rate, the 0.4 or 0.04% interest rate that they pay, then you see competitors moving into this space like the BlockFis and different places like this, where you can stake your digital assets for an 8% return. I mean, that's outperforming the average stock market. I mean, that's like, that's a pretty darn
outrageous.
Yeah. And so I get all these ads all the time, from all the, the big traditional banks. Oh yeah. I was looking at one yesterday that American Express was offering. It was a high yield savings account and it was 0.07 interest rate. I was just like, What are we even talking about? How is that high yield? What is it? That's yielding almost nothing.
Oh, and this is what happens when monopolies stifle innovation, right? Like why would a company be compelled to give you a better rate and impact their bottom line when there are no competitors in the market? And all the competitors are largely offering things within the same sort of field. Blockchain has really opened the doors for average retail individuals to have exposure to opportunities that would largely be only available to institutional level individuals. Ergo, the BlockFis and the DeFis and the decentralized liquidity pools projects that we're now seeing coming forward. And I think that's really, really good for the market and for the industry at large, right? I think we've kind of all, to an extent, lifted the veil off of, how Wall Street behaves and these financial practices. And of course, there is some risk to the consumer, but I wouldn't argue that somebody that works as a Wall Street banker is any smarter than you or me. And why should this individual, simply because they have more capital, why should only they be allowed to participate in these high yield activities, right? I think we as individuals have enough knowledge now to make educated risks and take educated risks and participate in these systems as well. And so the BlockFis of the world and these new sort of liquidity options and are sort of giving us access to that. And again, I think that's a really healthy development for the financial market at large. And it forces these banks, or at least I hope it will force these banks to reevaluate what they're really offering consumers, right?
Yeah. Well, it has to, right? If you want to stay competitive, it really has to. They've got to reevaluate what a high yield means. If they're offering you a bond or something at a fraction of a percentage point, yet I could just move my money into a stable coin like USD coin and invest it in BlockFi and get an 8% return. That's probably safer than the stock market. It's probably safer than just about anything you could do. And you mentioned a key word there too, that I think has, been obviously an issue during this pandemic, but this idea of risk mitigation, right? And one of the things that's come out throughout this pandemic, because you hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, before we can go back to work or whatever, we have to be safe. We have to do this. And they use this generic catch-all, this safe, right? Safe being super objective. But the idea, or super subjective, excuse me. But the idea is basically that there was never a time without risk, right? Maybe risk is elevated now because of the pandemic, but ultimately you weren't safe before. And so this idea that you can't go back to a world that's unsafe is, I think, problematic and as an idea. But it's the same in the financial business, right? You weren't safe before. Sure, you have some FDIC money or whatever, but even at that, you're only insured up to a certain amount. So if you had your entire life savings or your retirement funds or whatever in some bank and they went, belly up, you could still lose money. Or if you were invested in some of these funds that the Bernie Madoff style stuff, you get invested with the wrong guy and your money could vaporize. You weren't safe in the first place, right? And so
that's a really, really great point to make, and I think to use another metaphor, because I'm big on them, is, as you move up a corporate ladder within a project or something, when you start hitting the executive suite, it's like you see past the veil. Right. That sense of perhaps security that you might have as an employee with your job You see the books now, you see the financial books, you see all the risks that the company is in, how many weeks of operation time you have it, unless you're something like PayPal where you've got more money than God, all of that sort of the lifting of that proverbial veil, I think has been something that we've been exposed to now in the financial market and in our day-to-day lives with the pandemic, as you mentioned, right? It's so, you put it so well that, the world was always unsafe, but now we have this consciousness around this stuff. And you have to have a plan in place, which is why largely when I talk to people on these podcasts and these shows, my biggest recommendation is, obviously I'm biased, go buy some digital gold and silver through Lode Pay. But on a bigger macro perspective, have a digital strategy, start building, a plan for your wealth that takes these assets into consideration, because it is one of the biggest wealth generation events of our lifetime. And I would hate for people to get left in the dust. I want to bring as many people along on this journey as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much of that too is going to be boiling down to even educating financial advisors, right? I mean, right now, a lot of them are incentivized to work certain ways and use certain tools, either because they're a part of a larger corporation, or, even as an individual, they have their partners that, their insurance tools, their financial investment tools, whatever they've got, so I think getting them educated as well, because, for example, I have a friend who's a financial advisor. He's quite a bit older than me. So I my whole life I've been going to him, asking him little things, hey, what should I be doing? Blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to Bitcoin, he's like, oh my God, I wouldn't touch it with 100-foot pole, And I was like, well, yeah, but if I'd touched it 5 years ago, I'd be multimillionaire. I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, there's nothing else you could have pitched me that would have made me as much money as this, And I also think that there's something, and maybe this is something kind of beautiful about crypto also, is I think there's kind of this communal aspect that the more people who buy in, the safer it becomes, even though Bitcoin by all rights could drop down to $1,000 or something again. Yeah. It seems like there is so much money in the system now, and so many people backing it, and so many people who have gone whole hog believing in this system, that, the likelihood of it failing is probably not that, not that high. Not to say that there won't be ebbs and flows, but it's probably not going back to zero anytime soon.
I would argue probably not. And that's a great observation as well, right? As we reach sort of a critical mass and more people come into the system, what happened, part of the reason for this volatility was that the market was small enough that if a whale, as they're colloquially referred to, were to move all their assets out of Bitcoin or into an altcoin or something like that, it would cause a collapse, a vacuum in the market, right? And market psychology would switch. When you're now at the point where, the world's biggest hedge funds and institutional money is now also invested in, retirement funds have Bitcoin holdings and all of that. If one whale or even two whales move out of the market there's enough capital there that it barely blips.
Yep. Well, and that's the thing. And they anticipate it getting quite a bit higher before it gets lower. And so to your point, basically the more money in it, the more people invested in it, the safer it will become. And not to say it'll be stable like some of these coins that are designed to be stable. But at the same time, is it any more dangerous than the stock market? What causes some company to maybe just go out of business and you've lost your stock?
It's certainly not trading futures.
Perfect. Well, hey, as we're getting here to the end, do you have sort of any parting shots, or do you want to give people sort of whatever they need to get involved or learn more about what you're doing over at Lode, or just anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first and foremost, if you're interested in learning about what we're doing at Lode, you're interested in the concept of digital gold and silver, maybe taking an equity stake, whatever it may be, maybe you just want to ask questions, head over to Lode.one, LODE.one, and have a conversation with us, either in our Telegram channel. You can talk with me directly, or you can hit up our support team and they can largely answer all your questions. It's where you're going to find great things like white papers, project papers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you just want to get a mobile app and start buying today, and all that technical wizardry is kind of beyond your scope of caring, you can head over to lodepay.com, LODEPAY.com, download our mobile wallet and get buying digital gold and silver pretty much instantly, or as close as instantly as the law will allow us to be. If you want to argue with me about all the things I got marginally wrong on today's show, you can find me at Nicholas Prouten on Twitter. Most of us on social media, most of our accounts are registered under Lode Pay Media. And on YouTube, I do my own little sort of news anchor show as well. So if you guys are interested in me being in the interviewer seat rather than the interviewee, highly recommend you guys hop on over to Lode Media on YouTube too.
Great. Well, and yeah, not to blow too much smoke up your butt, but I mean, in prepping for this show, I watched a bunch of your videos. I listened to a bunch of content, also other interviews of yours on other shows. You guys do a really good job of explaining this technology and really sort of demystifying it. Like, it doesn't seem scary, right? And so even though, it is you're buying it in a digital way and you're purchasing tokens versus a piece of hard silver that you can stick in your pocket. I think you do a really good job of sort of like removing that layer of fear from that stuff. I think it does become very accessible for people.
Well, there's a quote from H.P. Lovecraft, who questionable figure, but beyond that, the oldest fear of man, and I'm paraphrasing here, the oldest feeling of man is fear. And the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown, right? And with this technology, there is that element of that. And if I individually and Lode as a project can help play a role in demystifying that, taking away that fear, then I consider my job well done. So thank you for that compliment, Ryan. And it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to not just you, our guest, but everybody who tunes in this week and every week. We look forward to connecting with everybody online, and we'll see you all next time.